Anyone who regularly watches this channel knows that most of my videos are about security, but when I have time, I also occasionally like to do some maker projects. In fact, the most viewed video on my channel right now is one I did a few months ago where I did an experiment where I was trying to figure out if I could power a Raspberry Pi Zero with a solar panel. So recently, I was trying to think of another kind of maker project that I could do, and I started thinking about robotics. I've always thought robotics are really cool. Things like the Mars rovers and the Boston Dynamics robots. Every time there's like a new video that comes out of some new thing that's happened with any of those robots, I always watch the videos several times and I just think it's really cool. But I've never actually built a robot myself. So I decided that I'm going to build my very first robot. So now that I've decided I wanted to build a robot, now I need to decide what kind of robot am I going to build? Where am I going to get the parts for that kind of robot? So naturally, I went to the resource I always go to anytime I want to do something with hardware, and that is Adafruit. Adafruit actually has a guide and a whole little kit you can get to build a simple Raspberry Pi powered robot. I figured since I do at least have some experience working with Raspberry Pis, this would be a good place to start. There might be things out there like Arduinos or other microcontrollers that would be better to power a robot, but I just wanted to stick to something that I at least have some sort of comfort with. Here you can see all of the parts that came in their little kit. The only thing that I wasn't able to get because it was out of stock was this little shelf right here that goes on top. So I don't have that, but I think I should be able to work around that and still make it work. So the first thing I did was set up my Raspberry Pi with Raspberry Pi OS. This guide is a little bit outdated, so they're using Raspberry Pi 2, but I'm using the more modern Raspberry Pi 4. The next thing I need to do is set up the motor hat, which is going to allow me to control the motor from the Raspberry Pi. And this is the first step that's really outside of my comfort zone, doing something I've never done before. So we'll see how this goes. So the first thing I need to do is attach this header to my Raspberry Pi so I can use that to attach this hat to the Raspberry Pi as well. So I just place that on top of the GPIO pins and push it down, and then that's attached. And now I'm going to take the hat and place it over that so that the pins are sticking through these holes right here on the side. And now I'm going to solder these so it attaches the Raspberry Pi to the hat. Unfortunately, I'm not very good at soldering, so I'm just going to hope that I can make a connection and it doesn't blow the whole thing up and I don't burn myself. Those are my only goals here. So I got all the pins soldered to the board and I didn't burn myself, so that's a win. And I hope that I did a good enough job soldering it that it'll work, but we'll see when we get to that step. Next, I need to attach these terminal blocks to the board, which is going to require some more soldering, so we'll see how that goes. So I have my terminal blocks attached, and now I think I'm through with all the soldering I have to do for this project. So all my electrical engineers and people that actually know how to do soldering can stop cringing. And I think I'm going to move on to assembling the chassis. So I have this aluminum chassis that I'm using, and the first thing I'm going to do to start assembling is add the DC motors to the rear of the chassis where the wheels are going to be. Now I have an assembled chassis with wheels and motors. Next, I need to add the Raspberry Pi. The guide on Adafruit actually recommends cutting out a piece of cardboard to go underneath the Raspberry Pi in between the Pi and the chassis, which is a good thing they told me that because I wouldn't have thought about that. Apparently, if the bottom of the Raspberry Pi touches the metal part of the chassis, it could cause damage to the Pi. So I cut out a little piece of the box that all my parts came in from Adafruit, and I'm going to put that underneath the Pi. So now that I have the chassis and the Raspberry Pi assembled, I now need to do the wiring and add the battery. So now the motors are wired up, and now I need to add this battery pack, which holds 4 AA batteries. So this is the part where that shelf that I mentioned at the beginning would have come in handy. In the guide, they mentioned that you should have the shelf right here above the Raspberry Pi and the motor hat, and then the battery would actually sit on top of the shelf. But since I don't have a shelf and I don't really want to put the battery directly on top of the hat without any extra support, I think I'm going to try to put it in front right here and maybe get some tape or something to secure it in place. So now all of the assembly is done. I have the batteries hooked up, I have everything connected, and I have this bigger battery pack that's powering the motors, and I have this smaller battery pack that's going to power the Raspberry Pi. So now I just need to plug in the Raspberry Pi and hope everything works. Alright, lights are coming on, so that's a good sign. So the next step is to SSH into the Raspberry Pi and add some code and see if it works. Adafruit actually provides a test script using some of their CircuitPython libraries to make sure that all the motors and everything are connected and working right. So I'm going to try running that right now. This is kind of the moment of truth to see if I screwed anything up along the way during this whole process. So when I run this Python script, it should start moving around, and we'll see what it does. Hey, it's actually working. That's awesome. Okay, I did notice right at the beginning one of the tires kind of was spinning a little bit. So that might be just an issue with like weight, or maybe I just need to tweak the script to give it a little bit more torque or something like that. But I can play with that and try to perfect that to get that working better. But I'm really happy with that. I just built a robot that is actually working, and I can control it with Python code and tell it to move in different directions and try to do different things. I think that's really cool. So if I wanted to just make the robot move forward in one direction, I could just add one line of code to this little script, say robot go forward at 0.75 speed, which is a little faster than it did in the little test, and go for 1 second and then stop. That's really cool. I think that's awesome. So obviously this was a very beginner level robotics project, but I did build my very first robot and it works, and I can control it using Python code, which I'm super happy about. And I can continue building on this if I want to. I can add things like a motion sensor. I can add stuff like a controller support with like maybe a mobile app, or some other system that allows me to control it in real time. There are a lot of things I can do with this, and I just think that's really awesome, and I'm really happy that I was able to actually build a robot for the first time. If there's any other things that you might want me to add to this robot, or you want me to try building a different kind of robot, let me know and I might end up doing it.